Fairness clearly matters to us in the real world and in the real world economies. Payouts are not simply payouts. And yet what we have in standard economic game theory is this idea of payoffs, and a higher payoff is always better. There is no kind of element of fairness in standard analysis. The distribution and meaning of payoffs matters to most people. Where we see this kind of brought up and discussed most often in economics is the example of the ultimatum game. The ultimatum game is set up such that we have two players, player A and player B. Player A kind of divides up $10 and passes that off to player B. Player B then can either accept that division, where player A gets a payoff of X, and then player B gets a payoff of 10 minus X, or player B can reject that division that player A has created, and both players walk home with nothing, right? So this is the standard kind of ultimatum game. We can talk about fairness within this. When we run this game experimentally, modal and median offers are usually right around 40 to 50%. So player A, most of the time, right, the modal response and the median is right around 40 to 50% kind of divided up. So they either offer player B, a payoff of $5 or somewhere around, $4, something like that. The mean is a little bit lower. The mean is around 30 to 40%, but that's because some people go a little bit low, more extreme on the lower end, and almost no one goes over the 50% side of things. Offers between 40 and 50% to player B are rarely rejected. So if you offer somebody around 40% of the pot, so if you offer them, player B, $4, these are rarely rejected offers. Offers below 20%, however, are rejected about half of the time, right? And so if player A offers, here's, $1, or here's $2, it is going to get rejected by player B about half of the time. And player B, instead of going home with $1 or $2, is going to go home with absolutely nothing. And so is player A, right? Now, if you understand that you're dealing with humans and not econs, how good of a job do we do at playing the ultimatum game, given this evidence that I have in front of you? Pause a minute to think about this. Notice our strategies work out quite well here. What we most often offer almost always gets accepted. We're probably a little bit risk averse here, so we don't want to go away with 0. So maybe we don't kind of score big all that often, but whatever, we're risk averse. We avoid tons of non-cooperative conflict of 0-0 outcomes. Our actual strategies work well with playing against actual people. The rules that we have adopted for playing this match the reality of the humans that we face. Depending on the setup, less than 10% of the total transactions actually get rejected. This is a high-end estimate. Usually this number is actually closer to 3%. So it's very rare that we end up with a 0-0 outcome. Think of how this matters in the context of a market economy. So we can consider kind of a monopolist. A monopolist is essentially playing an ultimatum game. The monopoly offer is kind of the player A offer, like, hey, I'm going to take some of this surplus from you, right? The monopoly price is to take the max amount of consumer surplus it can. The market price would be to take none of the extra surplus, to jack up the price, none. Well, how much do we jack up the price? Richard Thaler talks about this ultimatum kind of setting within a monopolist decision, given this kind of example where he talks about buying a beer at the beach. So this is kind of a famous example that he has. It's featured in his book, The Winner's Curse, early on in that book. And he says, you're sitting on a beach and you can ask, a friend asks you, hey, I'm going to go get a beer. Do you want one? And you're like, yeah, sure. But he says, how much are you willing to pay for the beer? Because I don't know what the price is yet. And the people within the experiment get one of two options. The friend is either going to go to a kind of a beat up corner store or to a luxury resort, right? And so this example comes from 1985, so the numbers are a little bit low, but the willingness to pay at the fancy hotel is around $2.65 for a beer. And yet, people kind of respond that they're only willing to pay $1.50 for a beer if the friend is going to a corner store. Well, what is this showcasing for us, right? Buyers, if they feel ripped off, won't continually repeat business with some kind of monopolist. And so what we could see in this kind of setting is people are making judgments on what they think is actually fair, right? What they think is happening here. So at the corner store, we assume that their costs are kind of low. And so we're willing to allow the producer to charge, somewhat of a high price, but not too high, not too ridiculous. So we're only willing to pay like $1.50 for a beer there. However, if it's at a really, really fancy resort, we understand that they have other costs, that their lobby is really nice and they have these chandeliers or whatever it all is, right? And so we understand that it might be more costly to have even that same bottle of beer there. And so we're like, you can jack up the price a little bit, and a little bit of a jack up of the price is going to be a higher price than it would be at the corner store. So we're willing to pay something more, like $2.65 there, right? And so we think of this as kind of like, okay, the monopolist has to play within the bounds of an ultimatum game, because otherwise we might not feel like the distribution of the surplus is actually fair. But the context that that exchange takes place within is going to matter greatly. Another little example here comes from Uber, right? You get surge pricing within Uber. So if the system is really, really busy, then the prices go up, right? So they have surge pricing. Well, a 2 times surge price versus a 2.1 times surge price should, according to standard economic theory, create a situation where the 2 times surge price would cause people to ride, a little bit more often than the 2.1 times surge price, right? A 2.1 times surge price is a higher price, and so we should see a lower quantity demanded. However, 2 sounds like it's just a randomly chosen number, like, well, we're jacking the prices twice as much, right? Whereas 2.1 seems calculated, as though there's a reason, like, oh man, we can't get enough drivers on the road. We have to charge you 2.1 times the normal price. And what they've actually found at Uber is that more people are willing to ride at 2.1 times the price than 2 times the price, because it's perceived as being a little bit more fair. All right, so that was fairness. Now we've gotten through trust, cooperation, and fairness. Up next, if you guys click on the video right over here, we're going to ask the question, so what? And we're going to try and talk about social preference theories.